I don't usually speak at these events because I'm usually sitting in the corner scribbling in shorthand. Then I go home to my writing shed and turn out features for the Morning Star. Um, but Joe asked me if I had anything I wanted to say about the media. And it turns out I've got quite a lot to say about the media. The BBC don't come out of this very well at all. So I'm hoping this is going to be quite measured, not the usual sort of angry rant that I have in the mornings when I put the BBC News on. I'm an old school journalist, which means I believe there's a proper way to do things because that's how I was trained. But old school doesn't mean old fashioned because I've had to relearn my trade about a dozen times over, mainly because of technology. I've also been a press officer for charities, quangos, women's groups of all sorts, and in recent years for Fair Play for Women and the Safe Schools Alliance. So I remain them. I chose this trade in about 1978, God, when I was still at school, and then I had a radio program when I was at university. I did an apprenticeship, started on local newspapers. And in my first job, I did a story on a local factory that was polluting the canal. My editor ran it on the front page, the Pontypridd Observer. Thank you very much. Very good paper. And then I got a phone call from the factory's managing director, who said to me, well, I know what you look like, and I'm going to come up behind you and cut off all your hair. And I remember at the time, I was 20, pondering on the really specifically sexist nature of that threat. And then he followed up with saying, oh, that canal that you're so fond of, you'll be found floating in it one day. And I said, oh, like Ophelia, because I was a grammar school girl. So baffled silence from him. I put that call on speakerphone so the entire newsroom heard it. And my editor said to me, oh, get used to it. If you're not getting death threats, you're not doing your job properly. Well, I never did get used to it, of course, because no sane person would. But it is familiar territory, as it is, I think, for a lot of us. Some of the pieces that I've written, and especially over the past 8 or 9 years, seem to bring a lot of whinging men out of their caves. They complain that I'm bigoted because I write that prostitution is not sex work, but rape torture. Yeah. They say that I'm unkind because I stand for women's sex-based rights. Well, I believe it's a journalist's job to be accurate, fair, unbiased, truthful. And being kind in that context is just a childish irrelevance. So the whinging men also sometimes say that I'm prudish. I think that's mainly because I loathe drag. Prudish. We have to pause, I think, for my hollow laughter, because I was in my 20s in the 1980s, and I think we'll say no more. And also, they claim that I'm right wing. Where's Charlotte? I want Charlotte to laugh at that particularly. And these are men who read my features in the Morning Star. So, I had a commission some years ago from the Institute for Welsh Affairs, and that was before Wales's government and the media, which is basically Cardiff, fell to this spurious ideology. I listened yesterday to Sarah Tanburn from Wales talking about the Welsh media for being supine, and I could have cried because the media in Wales used to be full of the bravest and the best. They were the journalists I admired, and now they're guilty of self-censorship, which is the most pitiful behaviour for any journalist. So the Institute for Welsh Affairs wanted me to look at bias in media coverage. And I asked reporters, producers, editors, how they decided whom to interview on various topics. And that included vox pops, when you go out in the street and shove a microphone in front of a member of the general public and ask them random questions. So these journalists said to me, if they were doing pieces on the economy, they would tend to approach men. If the piece was on the cost of childcare or groceries, they would tend to approach women. Then I looked at the amount of airtime, TV and radio, which included female experts. And at that stage, that was a decade ago, it was 4-1 to men. Apparently last year it was 2-1. Now, that's too slow. And on the one hand, I know that just giving up on that wouldn't speed it up. But I'm 65. I want it to speed up. Why would we not have more women experts? So this is my real soapbox moment. I am sick of seeing women on TV news being given a platform just so they can tell a sob story, prodded preferably to cry on camera, only to be followed by an expert who is all too often a pale, stale male to talk about policy. So I work with women who have been trafficked and enslaved. They know what the government needs to do. So I urge them to tell their story, their narrative, and then to just keep talking. Don't wait for the questions. Tell the interviewer what needs to be done. Issue calls to action. Make demands of politicians. Shame them into caring if needs be. So 2 examples of women who have done battle with the media. Nick Williams from Fair Play for Women, Tanya Carter from Safe Schools Alliance. I helped out with their media work for quite a while. I thought I should start with a confession though, because I thought I had all the skills and experience to run any campaign on women's rights with the media, because I'd worked for so many charities on domestic violence, corporal punishment of children, Clause 28. I mean, I ran the press office on those HIV and AIDS campaigns under the Thatcher government. This wasn't overconfidence on my part. I genuinely felt I had the skills. And then, thanks to Stonewall, we had a new challenge, their strategy of inertia. That's a real thing. Some government departments have the same thing. They call it that, a strategy of inertia. So we had the advice to trans campaigners not to engage with the media. As a kind of pact of non-intervention, wasn't it? The last refuge of cowards. So that called for a different strategy. Some of it was old school techniques, and some of it was just more effort, more energy, more courage. My top example, but I'm not showing the clip because it's 14 minutes long. I brought handouts just out of habit, because that's what I do. The link for the clip is on the handout, and it's Nick Williams in 2018 commenting on the trans policy of the Girl Guides. Victoria Derbyshire show with Joanna Gosling sitting in. Helen Watts, who was a rainbow leader, had been expelled from Girl Guides because she didn't think that boys should be indoors near girls. Nick did the interview on Helen's behalf. Now, the first piece shows a video of Lily, a transgender girl whose story they had found. It's a soft focus, very sweetly cozy little film, and Lily is portrayed as utterly harmless, or she is, and it's suggested that excluding her from the brownies would have been cruel. At one stage, Gosling says to Nick, "But she's a little girl." Then Gosling said, "We also asked Girl Guides onto the programme and the campaign groups Stonewall and Mermaids who support the Girl Guide policy, but none of them were prepared to discuss the issue with the opposing side. We've also asked the NSPCC on, but they said no one was available. So instead, we'll put their various points to Nicola." Now, As someone who knows how to put together a broadcast package, this is no way to carry on. I regard that as unprofessional. I regard that as a sign of bias, or what we sometimes call propaganda. The presenter then puts various points from the NSPCC and Stonewall. They clearly had the time to draft and clear those statements, didn't have time to send anybody to the TV studio. This is a really bad screen grab of Nick Williams sitting alone on a sofa whilst the BBC presenter reads out statements from Stonewall, NSPCC, et al. So that wasn't the only time, by the way, that Nick Williams was alone in a broadcast studio. We had some times when so-called trans campaigners, no, trans so-called campaigns, right, grammar nerd as well, just wouldn't even do a down-the-line interview because Nick was on the piece. So they wouldn't even share radio airwaves with her, with us alone on the sofa. The interview is a must-pass in keeping calm under biased pressure. And it's also an example of the BBC's tactics, showing this sweet little film of a child in an aim to juxtapose a gender-critical campaigner as heartless. Yeah. Also, really importantly, it's a great example of reaching out to the audience and engaging with parents, daytime TV, and anyone who cares about the safeguarding of children, which is really what we need to do. I always urge campaigners and women's groups to just work with the media, just go along with some of it, because as journalists, we're not the important ones. We need to reach the public. You just work with us to try and do that. I do want to address this question of the trans lobby's lack of engagement, because I'm not sure, we never know where we are in the history of a campaign, do we? But I get the feeling that this might be about to bite them on the arse. When you steer clear of public debate, there are some consequences. Now, as a reporter, when I've covered events like this and we've had protesters, I feel it's my job, old school, to go and speak to the protesters and ask them if they have a spokesperson or if they want to make some sort of comment. I've been barked at quite a lot, and sometimes they shout no comment when I haven't actually even asked them a question. And I think we did have a placard once which said there is no cis in team, which is irrefutable, isn't it? And incoherent. So could we use that? And then I think covering philia at Portsmouth, we had placards which said "Suck my girl dick." And I thought I can't inflict that on the loyal readers of Morning Star. That's not right. So they really haven't engaged, and I think it's really important that we all try and talk to journalists one-on-one as human beings. Tanya Carter of Safe Schools Alliance, there were many times when we knew that Tanya would be faced with vicious criticism and she'd have to go head to head with the most slick and patronizing spokespeople. And every time she said, okay, I'll do it, which is, it's the press officer's dream, really. So trans campaigners have self-identified as the opposition, but they've not really come into the arena of public debate. Whereas we have acknowledged people's concerns, their misgivings, their lack of knowledge, and we've explained with clarity, with compassion. Now, if you haven't done that for the past decade, journalists, producers, researchers don't really know who you are. You're not in their contacts books, you're not in the databases. So I'm not sure now that we'll see a lot of trans campaigners coming into the media because they were shielded for so long. There's a consequence to that. Let me just say something about being a press officer as well as being a journalist, because I know that a lot of women's groups, don't have funding, don't have staff, so don't have press officers as such. I've often said to journalists about a woman that I'm putting up for interviews, look, she's a good talker. Trust me, she'll cope with anything you throw at her, but please give her a bit of breathing space to say her bit. It's a sort of unspoken pact. It's a game with unspoken rules. It's reciprocal. I'm saying I can give you a good interviewee, but I have some unspoken conditions. So I hope we have an understanding. And I would advise any of you to find someone who can be in that press officer role, to be the sort of broker, the one who's pitching stories, pitching interviewees, and possibly complaining after the event. I've had a lot of uncomfortable and difficult calls to producers where I've said, oh, I saw what you did there. That was a bit of an ambush, wasn't it? And quite often they make the mistake of going to fetch a more senior journalist to talk to me, which is always a sign that my complaint is valid. And with media interviews, the negotiation beforehand and the follow-up afterwards is absolutely vital because it's the cultivation of a relationship. And I think we're all in this for the long game, aren't we? So, whatever you feel about the media, remember this. We have made our mark. We've done very well. The coverage has been exceptional. And above all, I would say, know your place. Because your place may be on Newsnight, or your local radio station, or daytime TV, or Question Time. Consider writing for the Morning Star. Other less reputable media outlets are available. Not the Sun, please. I have to draw the line somewhere. I will give free media training to any woman that wants it. Any woman, Lynn? No. One of us. If you want some media training, go to Hamlet, take my details. We can do it on Zoom, whatever. I worked out that I think in 30 odd years as a freelancer, I may have trained about 2,500 women. Um, I was super helped that some of them became MPs. But I do see them popping up from time to time on TV and radio. So, I don't know how much longer I have to go, but I'll train another 1,000 at least. So just a parting thought that, the media is individual journalists. We're really just the people that you work with to reach the public. The public wants to hear your stories and they will make a difference. So trust me, I've interviewed hundreds, thousands of very so-called ordinary people, and they can be magnificent because they believe in common sense and material reality and justice. So the general public will respond to us because they are us.